Thank you all so much for coming to the inaugural first ever LGBTQ History class brought to you by Alphabet Army. Where's Jay? Alphabet Army. And East Texas Rainbow Network. East Texas Rainbow Network is not a nonprofit. We are loudmouth people that just post things on the internet to get information out there. And I was called in today to do exactly that, but in person. So thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for Tyler Public Library for having us today. There are board member applications here for Alphabet Army. And also I want to say hello and thank you for Tyler Area Gays representatives coming out here, PFLAG representatives coming out here. We've got Pride of East Texas representatives, and that's from Longview, so someone had to drive really far to get here, crossing the county lines. Okay, so really quickly, look around the room. Let's look around the room real carefully. Look at each other, get to know each other, look at your name tags. And you're getting arrested, you're getting arrested, you're getting arrested, you're getting arrested, you're getting arrested. Maybe not.
She's getting arrested.
Maybe not. Getting arrested, baby, getting arrested, getting arrested. This side of the table, you will get harassed. You might be getting arrested. A lot of that going on. Back row, getting arrested. You two holding hands like that, you getting arrested. Everybody's getting arrested. So I was a little bit nervous. I was not sure where to start because where does one begin to talk about LGBTQ history, because there's kind of a lot that's there. So what I ultimately decided on is we are going to talk about just this decade, 1959 to 1969. I'm calling it the decade that changed us, or the decade that empowered us. To understand what the events we're going to talk about, we're going to try to push through 8 uprisings today. Originally I was going to do 4, but then I learned new stuff and I want an info dump for you. So that's what we're looking at. How many of you here today have heard the name Josie Carter? Good, that's more than I expected. That's wonderful. The rest of you today are going to get to know the name Josie Carter. This is Marsha P. Johnson. We're going to talk about her briefly later. But she said, no pride for some of us without liberation for all of us. And so part of what we are doing today is we're going to be discussing community togetherness. What I want you to get out of this today is essentially it is an election year and it's going to be all of us in it together. There is not one person that can actually take credit for Pride, because Pride is a collective community effort. There are some pretty cool key players, but we are all in it together, and I'm really excited to tell you about it. In order to understand what happened, we have to understand what led up to it. So once upon a time in 1948, Alfred Kinsey, you might be familiar with Alfred Kinsey from the movie Kinsey. He founded the Kinsey Institute. He published The Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, or the first of the Kinsey reports in 1948. And what that was introducing the Kinsey scale, which was essentially on a scale of 1 to 6, how gay are you? At 1, you're not gay at all. And on number 6, you are leading the parade, okay? You are gay, gay, gay. So that was something that everybody was talking about, because you're not supposed to talk about that. Man-on-man love? No, taboo. So people were already kind of thinking, having discussions with each other. 1950, the Lavender Scare rolls around. Lavender Scare, it's the Red Scare, but gay. The Lavender Scare said essentially that we as homosexuals, and all of us in this room by the 1950s standards, our label is homosexual. We as homosexuals are mentally disturbed. We are mentally ill. And because we are so mentally ill, mentally disturbed, we are susceptible to communism. I know. You gay wads are a risk.
True.
So what that did, that resulted in launching official investigations. If anybody heard that you were just a little bit Nelly, you would get called into the office and they would say, okay, how gay are you? And then they would fire you. So they started firing federal employees at 91, and by the end of the Lavender Scare, over 400 people lost their jobs. Moving right along to 1950. So we have the Lavender Scare begins saying, homosexuals are evil, they're perverts, they're horrible people. And then the Mattachine Society rolls around and says, psst, fellow gay wads, fellow homosexuals, let's gather in my living room to talk about this stuff. And it was illegal. Mattachine Society was founded by Harry Hay, and it was the first of the homophile organizations. We did not have gay organizations back then. They were homophile organizations.
Oh, that's a word.
Yes, homophile, P-H-I, homophile. And in those days, it really was illegal. They had their first meetings, and they thought back in those days that they were going to be raided, dragged out, carted off in a paddy wagon, and arrested. This is a little if you were arrested handbook pamphlet that they would give you, so that if you were out and about and you were seen gay, perceived as gay, or whatever, and they arrested you, you know what your rights are. So our first homophile organizations existed as social clubs, but also as educational and advocacy networks to tell each other, you need to know your rights. How many of you know your rights in this room right now? Okay. We got it. We have another class coming up. Okay. And I want you to pay attention. These are Lavender era newspaper headlines. Look at how they talk about us. Purging homosexuals. Homosexuals fired by the State Department. It's you think the headlines these days are bad. Whew. So 1950, oh Lord, 1950, it was really homophobic. The government released a report on employment of homosexuals and other sex perverts, which again is part of the Lavender Scare. And what that did was it said, again, we as homosexuals are a security risk. We are mentally disturbed. We are easily manipulated, and that makes us a threat. And so knowing that, they put it into government code that they should investigate and find a way to fire us from our positions. And that's what this one right here is. So in 1951, the Supreme Court had Stuman versus Riley. This was a bar case. So back in the day, if you had a liquor license and you were giving alcohol to us sexual perverts, homosexuals, they could suspend your liquor license, and that's what they did to the Black Cat. You will hear about a Black Cat bar later. This is not that Black Cat bar, but wouldn't you know that all the Black Cat bars seem to be gay bars? So in this case, we have a straight owner, because that was a big thing. Straight folks realized that we are a really good market to tap, and so they would open gay bars, and sometimes they would get harassed along with us. So Stuman filed suit because they tried to take away his liquor license, and what they decided in that court case was that us gathering as homosexuals itself was not a problem. It's when we are breaking the law while being gay. So like, yeah, drinking while gay. So we could hang out. We could even have alcohol, but no kissing, no touching, no touching. Save some room for Jesus. So we could hang out, we just couldn't be ourselves. So then in 1952, we have President Truman signing the Immigration and Nationality Act, which did a lot of different things. And among those things, it said that they would let people of good moral character immigrate to the United States. And what that did was that defined homosexuals further as being what? Mentally disturbed, mentally ill, easily susceptible to communism, and a security risk. And so they just called us of bad moral character. So that meant gay people could not come over here and apply for citizenship because you're gay. And then 1952, big year for us. Christine Jorgensen. Have y'all ever heard of Christine Jorgensen? Mm-hmm. Heck yeah. Christine Jorgensen, she was an American activist, a singer, a cabaret singer, and she made headlines, worldwide headlines, because she's the first American who got successful gender reassignment surgery overseas. And look at this headline, ex-GI becomes blonde beauty. They don't talk about us like that these days. No. They don't. This was a brief moment in history where she was actually celebrated for that. And here we've got her with her husband. She was actually denied a marriage license with her husband, so she made headlines. Everybody was like, woo, Christine, you're so fabulous. But girl, you are still male on your birth certificate, so you can't get a marriage license. So on that note, I want you to keep in mind the importance of identity documents, because this is going to be a recurring theme. So in 1952, The DSM. I'm sure some of us in this room are familiar with the DSM.
Yeah.
Yeah, hey, me too. So the very, very first DSM, it was published and it made all the rage. And in that one, they defined homosexuals as deviants, part of schizophrenic personality disorder.
Oh, wow.
Yes, they did. And so people were talking. So we've got people talking about Christine Jorgensen. She's a pervert according to the DSM. So the conversations that are going on culturally, keep that in mind. 1953, One magazine comes out with the help of the Mattachine Society. That is the first pro-gay organization's publication to be sold openly on newsstands. That wasn't that long ago. And then 1953, the big one, Executive Order 10450, which officially banned homosexuals from government positions and even private contracting with federal contracts. So they really, really, really did not want us involved, like at all. In 1955, we have the Daughters of Bilitis that gets formed. Woo! Daughters of Bilitis. Del Martin and her partner Phyllis Lyon, they were talking with Harry Hay and the homies over there, and they said, we don't have any lesbian friends. And Mattachine was like, well, girl, you got to create some. You got to build a place. And so they formed the Daughters of Bilitis, which was the first lesbian homophile organization, and they published the Ladder magazine, and that was the first lesbian publication. In 1956, we've got the Supreme Court going back for the California Supreme Court, for Villegra versus the Department of Alcohol and Beverage Control, which once again said, we as homosexuals, we can gather in a business. Us being in a business as queer people is not reason enough to suspend business licenses, because once upon a time they would do that. And that sounds kind of familiar. If you paid attention to Texas politics in the last couple of years, when they were trying to say that people that were dressed like half of you in the room could not be in certain businesses. And luckily those laws did not pass, but ooh, it was close. 1957, Frank Kameny, that's an important name to know. We can do another class on him a whole other time, but he was fired from his federal position. And he sued. It didn't work, but it was one of the first times we went to court for us to protect our rights. And again, that was part of the Lavender Scare series. 1958, we've got SCOTUS. That's the Supreme Court of the United States for One versus Olison. That was a very fun case for us. That was the first Supreme Court case that was dealing with us as homosexuals, and it was the first to address protection of our free speech rights as homosexuals. What had happened? Well, they've got this magazine, they're trying to put it out in the mail. The postmaster says, this is pervert material, this is obscene, we cannot mail this out, so we will refuse. On top of that, they were being harassed by the FBI, and the postmaster said, y'all are perverts, you're freaks. We will not mail this out, so they sued, and we won that case. They went in our favor, and what they affirmed was that writings about homosexuals, homosexuality, homosexual acts itself is not inherently obscene. That was back in the 50s. We were still having this conversation about whether or not just existing as LGBTQ people is gross, obscene, perverted. Pay close attention, especially this upcoming year, to the headlines. So while all that social conversation is going on, while we've got all of these laws that are being debated and other things, we've got how we were treated for mental health care. Trigger warning, our history sucks. Once upon a time, they practiced what was called conversion therapy. Nowadays, we call it reparative therapy. And what that is attempting to change one person's sexuality to another. And I think that there's some people in the room who might say that is impossible to do. It is no longer a socially acceptable practice by all of the major medical organizations, and that is important to understand, as they have been attacking the transgender community in the last couple of years legislatively, and especially already this year. They've been talking about reparative therapy. Reparative therapy includes lobotomies, which is the ice pick going right there through your skull. That's what's being pictured right up here. A lot of gay men in the 50s, in the 60s, were victims of lobotomy. Like most of those procedures were done on gay men. Another treatment for our delusions and our disorder is medications and HRT. So we hear about Thorazine, which basically zonks you out and makes it impossible to be human. medications to sedate, to chemically castrate, giving trans women testosterone. Then we had psychoanalysis, which was basically, how do you feel? Tell me about your memories. Tell me about what your mother did to you. All of these things, and finding ways to make it that it was your fault that you are the way that you are. Another form of conversion therapy is electroconvulsive therapy, shock therapy. That is this picture that's right down here. They were preparing that. A lot of us LGBTQ people, that was done to us. So another form of what can be considered conversion therapy is also aversion therapy, which is essentially giving medications to induce nausea, electric shocks, sometimes even attached to genitals, things like that. And what they would do is, I want you to picture the person you love most, and they would show you a picture of the person that you love most, your same-sex partner, and give you a little jolt. Zap! So it's not conversion because it's not making you change, but what it is anytime you experience that attraction, your PTSD and your CPTSD at that point in your body will go, you're not gay. Did it work? Did it make happy, healthy human beings? It really didn't. It really didn't. We meet a lot of the older LGBTs, do not talk about what it was like, because it sucked. Moving right along. So some more historical context. So we had mistreatment through the law and underlining cultural conversations. We have mental health abuse. And then discriminatory laws are in existence, drinking while gay, gathering as homosexuals, cross-dressing, shout out to everybody in this room. And that meant there was police harassment. That meant targeting gender nonconforming people, raiding queer places. Like if this was 1960, any minute now, here they come. That's why we actually have Aaron posted up at the door. Part of that harassment was, you think they just took us, they just arrested us nicely? No, they didn't. They didn't. Sometimes we were beaten. Sometimes we were sexually assaulted. If you watched A League of Their Own, the TV show, the one thing that was missing out of that one episode was showing that reality for lesbians and trans men, and even some gay men. Harsh criminal sentences were also part of this treatment. So they'd arrest you, they would charge you with the crime, and then you would be convicted, and some of that would include fines, jail time, listing on the sexual offenders registry, and public shaming. So that would be putting our names and our photographs in the newspaper. Not just that though, our addresses and our places of work. It's real heavy, isn't it? Kind of sucks. This image right here is out of Waco, Texas. This is a newspaper. These men were gathering at a gay bar, having a wedding. I don't know if it was a mock wedding or just like, we're having fun dressing up, or if it was a wedding. But this man was dressed as the bride, and he is publicly shamed in the newspaper on the front page as the bride. So that's leading us up. Are you a little mad right now to hear all of this?
Yes.
Doesn't it make you want to throw a donut? So, faggots, stay out. This is a sign that was in a place called Barney's Beanery. It was hung up, they don't know if it was hung up as early as the 20s or the 30s, but it certainly was there in the 1950s. Who wants to guess when that sign came down?
It's probably still there.
2003.
Earlier, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
1985.
Wow.
Yeah, 1985. So, yes, there were establishments that did not want us in there. They did have signage like that. It was not very kind. Laverne Cox said, "It is revolutionary for any trans person to choose to be seen and visible in a world that tells us we should not exist. When you leave here today, chant that to yourself, because all of our trans homies that are in here today are beautiful, wonderful, shining stars." Okay, whew. Y'all ready for it? Let's get into it. So Cooper's Donuts. This is, in quotes, this is the first gay uprising in the United States, 1959. Picture it. Los Angeles, California, 1959, Cooper Run. Cooper's Donuts located at the Run. What is the Run? It's the gayborhood. It's where artists, people of color, poor people, gay people, trans people, everybody would hang out at the Run. So Cooper's was frequented by LGBTQ people, and this event itself was in response to police harassment. If you find a theme today, go ahead and make your tally mark, because we're going to add it up later and see. So why did it happen at Cooper's? There were laws against serving alcohol to LGBTQ people. There were laws against being gender nonconforming, which resulted in police harassment. And at the time that Cooper's Donuts had occurred, LAPD arrests of people like us in this room were up by 85%. Yes. And back in those days, some gay spaces, because it was very easy to come after us that are gender nonconforming, some gay spaces would not allow trans or drag queens, anybody in their space that was gender nonconforming. So if you ever wonder why there is sometimes a little bit of a divide between trans and queer people, we have a long history of it. So here's what happened. The accepted lore is Cooper's Donuts was a hangout spot for LGBTQ people, and one day the officers show up and they start IDing people. They start IDing people and they start to try to make arrests. The story goes, 2 drag queens, 2 gay men, and a hustler. So we understand this today to possibly be 2 trans women, 2 gay men, and a sex worker. They said no. They objected. They said that there's not enough room in the back of the car, and so what did they do? They started pelting the officers with donuts and coffee cups. Now, mind you, back in those days, we didn't have paper coffee cups. Ceramic. They had managed to chase the police off. Police returned later with officers, and patrons scattered and the riot ended. So we have recognition of this, and that's something that we're going to cover today as well, is that in recent history, only in the last 10 years are we actually starting to acknowledge queer history and queer historical places. So June 22nd of 2023, Cooper Donuts, Nancy Valverde Square was dedicated. And then the LAPD apologized. They said, sadly, rather than working to protect this community, the LAPD, at that time, was not always kind to our gay, lesbian, gender nonconforming Angelinos. This mistreatment of our citizens was wrong and should never have happened. Hey! Okay, but there's some debate about Cooper Donuts. There was no news media coverage. There is no evidence in LAPD records. There is no evidence at all. There is one eyewitness account that comes from a book called City of Night by John Ricci, who says he was there that night. He was one of those 2 gay men that was being arrested. The actual location is also debated because Cooper's was a chain donut store. There were several in the area, and so colloquially, any donut place was called Cooper's. The Cooper family, though, they do acknowledge that it happened at their place. They claim ownership of that, and so does the city, the LAPD. We all recognize that it happened, so that one's kind of debatable. Moving right along to the Milwaukee Black Night Uprising of 1961, originally called the Milwaukee Black Night Bar Brawl. That's right, y'all, the first Pride wasn't a riot, it was a bar fight. This is Josie Carter. She was a community figure. She said, oh, he started it, but I stopped it. I may be a faggot, but I'm the one who stopped it. And understand, when we reclaim language against our oppressors, it makes them weaker. So you're going to hear a little bit of language throughout the day. All right, picture it. We are in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the Black Knight Bar. Real quick about the Black Knight Bar. It was originally opened as Mary's Tavern. Mary, the owner of the bar, was horrified because this was located at a dead-end street surrounded by gay bars, and she was trying to run it as a straight people hangout. The straights were being alienated or feeling a little weird being around us, and she said, I cannot take this anymore. Someone buy this bar from me. So she sold the bar to get away from all of us, and it reopened as the Black Knight. The bar was located in an area that in Mikhail Takash's his interview with Josie Carter, he describes it as in the lost, lonely part of town. The only businesses that were opening were businesses that didn't really want to be found, if that tells you anything about that neighborhood. All sexualities, all genders were welcome. Again, some places did not commingle that way because we were easy targets, but this one did. And this was a bar that we had black, we had Mexican, we had all Latinx, everybody was hanging out. The bar policy back then to allow diversity meant that the patrons were very loyal customers. Do not mess with our safe spaces. Because why? Sacred spaces are made sacred because we say they are. And this is a picture outside of the Black Knight. So what happened? It was either a bet or a dare. But 4 military servicemen, we don't know what branch, but 4 military servicemen decided to go to this gay bar, and at the door they refused to present IDs. Some gay bars back in the day would keep a list at the door of who everybody was, And they knew that, and they did not want their higher-ups to hear that they had been in a gay bar. So when they started trying to tussle with the bouncer, fists are being thrown, punches are going down. Josie Carter's across the bar, sees everything going on, and she says, "No, you're not going to hurt my husband." She said, "I went out with a beer bottle in each hand, ready to knock some heads." That's your coloring page, y'all. "I took a beer bottle and smashed his head. He was a big guy, and after that he got up, but this man turned on me, and I let him have everything that was left in that bottle. I cut him up. I'm not going to let him put his hands on me." And she hit him so hard that when the bar brawl ended, she noticed that her finger was dislocated. Adrenaline was pumping. So these men get knocked upside the head. He's bloody. They leave. They say, "We're coming back. You will rue the day." And they drop their friend off at a hospital. And then, because homophobia is a wonderful thing, it's so motivating. They went back to the neighborhood, got some friends from the local bars, and went back to the Black Night, where they found inside 75 patrons ready to rumble. Josie Carter had told them they are coming back, and we do not run from a fight. And I want y'all to remember that, because Josie Carter said, "What? We don't run from a fight." So the men come, they are screaming slurs. Josie says, "Bet," and everybody starts fighting. There is a person thrown through a window, got all cut up, furniture was broken, liquor bottles were smashed. It had to smell god awful in there. One person was reported in critical condition, and here's something interesting. They may have died. Yeah. There is, in records, if you go back and you look through, someone from that night, their same name, their same age, died later that year, and we don't know if it's the same person, and if it is, it could have been related to their head injury that they got that night. Damages were about $2,000, but that's $2,000 in 1961, so that's like a lot today. They started to arrest the people that invaded the queer space. I will repeat that. The police showed up while the gays were fighting with the straights, and they started arresting the straight people.
Hell yeah.
Yes. So I want to make sure y'all understood that, because sometimes history will surprise you. Josie said, and then the cops came and put them all in a paddy wagon and took them to jail. They said, "You have no business coming down here and harassing people." The police were real good to me back then. They took care of me and taught me how to stay out of trouble. I never had problems with the police as long as I didn't make problems. Charges were brought against the instigators. Yay. They were also dropped for lack of evidence. That story was kept alive through, I know, right? That story was kept alive through the newspaper for a little bit. So this is a first documented LGBT uprising in the United States. And this is Josie with the bar owner. These are some folks that you would have seen at the bar throwing down fisticuffs. These are some of the headlines from that time. And so who was Josie Carter? She was cool as heck. She was a beloved community figure. A lot of people refer to her as a community matriarch. We are very lucky. She gave time and photographs to the UWM archives. You can look them up online. You can look at her stories. You can learn all about her. She herself did not identify as transgender. Again, that word did not come along for a very long time, but she called herself and self-identified as gay. She said, "I'm more of a personality than a performer." She did do drag, and then eventually her husband was like, "Baby, I can't keep going to this gay bar, please stop." And so she did, and she continued to show herself in public as female presenting. And so today we might refer to her as transgender, but back then she was gay. She died in 2014, taking with her a wealth of our stories. Our stories are very important. There's a handful of you in the room that we need to talk to. Document your stories. Josie's community contributions were recognized posthumously at Pride Fest in 2018. In 2021, on the 60th anniversary, they called it Black Night Day, and they celebrated the uprising. They honored Josie. And then a landmark, a historical landmark, was dedicated back in 2022. So again, recognizing our place in history is very new. there is an ongoing effort legislatively across the nation to make sure we do not have these conversations and we do not have these kinds of plaques. So that's kind of a big deal that it's there. Dewey's Restaurant Sit-In, inspired by the civil rights movement. So picture it, Philadelphia, 1967, Dewey's was a place for LGBTQ people to hang out. It would be kind of like us going to Denny's later and then having a fight. There were some unruly youths. Were they unruly, or were they just existing as people and being joyful around people that look like those? They were gender nonconforming. Reports do kind of vary on that, but what you are noticing if you're keeping your tallies is that it's really easy to pick on gender nonconformity. And so they were being unruly because businesses would say, oh, you're camping out in our booths all night, not really ordering nothing except coffee. Annoying. So they would harass us, and some businesses would actually tax us just a little bit extra. Or in the Dewey's case, they would say, quit serving them for the rest of the night, and then the staff goes, we'll just quit serving them altogether. So those unruly youths, they called up Janus Society, which was another early homophile organization. They joined forces, planned a sit-in, because they said, golly, do you see what the African American community is doing with their movement? Let's borrow tactics, which is why it's very important that we recognize history at its intersections and within our communities. So they had the sit-in. 150 people were refused service. 3 teenagers were arrested, including the president of the Janus Society. So that made them a little bit upset, so they planned another sit-in for May 2nd. They were met with a huge police presence, but no arrests were made. The restaurant stopped that policy. The teens were convicted of disorderly conduct. So that inspired other demonstrations in other cities, because gay people do talk. We do. We love to gossip. We love to call each other up. And so they had other demonstrations. It also inspired the annual reminders, which I love. I love to be a thorn in a side. I love to be annoying. The annual reminders was a July 4th protest in our empowerment, and they did it every July 4th for 5 years. And then in 2018, a historical marker was dedicated, calling Dewey's the first gay sit-in in the United States. Which takes us to a sip-in at Julius's Bar, 1966 in Greenwich Village. What's that? The Gayborhood. Again, that is the place to be for artists, for poor folks, for people of color, for gay people. Julius is actually located around the corner from Stonewall Inn. We'll talk about that one in a minute. They had a liquor license. Some of these businesses back in the day did not have liquor licenses, and that was a whole other problem for them, but they did. And Julius was actually, they had been raided before a few times. The sip-in itself was organized by the Mattachine Society. We know about this because we have oral histories and we've got newspaper histories. So this was in response to discriminatory laws and practices, because again, you could not be served here in the state of New York, you could not be served alcohol as an openly homosexual person. So if you're like me and you walk in as a 100-footer, they just go, baby, just go, just get out of here. So Mattachine Society decided, you know what, we can use the courts to fight for our progress. And so what they did was they planned a sit-in where they would say, hey, we're gay and thirsty, in hopes that they would be denied service so that they could have a court case. And it took 3 tries to do that, because the first bar heard about it and closed before they got there. And they said, no. The second bar was like, oh my God, come on in. And they were like, drat. Well, let's have a drink, just a quick sip. So they went to Julius's, and the bartender at Julius's was like, please don't. Please don't do this. The Mattachines were like, we'll pay your legal fees. And he said, oh, okay, you can't have a drink. And that is when that famous photo was taken. You can't have the drink. No gays allowed. 3 deviants invite exclusion by bars. Deviants, they're wearing suit and ties. So they had their court case. And what did they do? They went to court. They won their case. They inspired lots of people. We could be served alcohol. We could be in a place being served alcohol. However, again, we just can't act it. So in 2016, it was added to the National Registry for Historic Places. In 2022, it was recognized by New York. And so you can, if you go traveling, you've got places to go and see things. Compton's cafeteria. This is one of my favorites. This is the beginning of trans activism in San Francisco. Picture it! It's 1966. Civil rights movement is in full swing. We are seeing all of that political backlash. It's the Vietnam era. We've got the hippies. They are growing out their hair. They are wearing gender nonconforming clothes. Feminism is starting. Gender norms are starting to shift. The national conversations are all about all of that. That is the same year that Harry Benjamin published The Transsexual Phenomenon. Harry Benjamin, if you were on HRT in this room, you are vaguely familiar with Harry Benjamin because he created the standard by which we receive HRT care. And that is the same year that the first gender-affirming clinic opened. So we've got all kinds of talk in the community. People are going, do you see these boys growing out their hair? Do you see these girls coming in here? All of it. And Harry Benjamin says, you should have access to care. Here's how to do it. I will give it to you. So what happened within our community was we started saying, hey, I belong. I can take up space. It's a dangerous place to be when you are a marginalized person. You start getting a sense of pride. So picture it, it's the Tenderloin District. The Tenderloin District was liquor stores, bars, gay bars, sex workers, adult clubs, affordable housing and hotels. It's the Vietnam era, so we've got patriots doing their duty for the boys going overseas, patriots being sex workers. This area was where you would go for sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Have a good time. We know about this from Susan Stryker's documentary, Screaming Queens. In it, she describes it as the gay ghetto. She reads the definition for tenderloin. It's not just a cut of meat, but tenderloin is a vice-ridden district controlled by corrupt policemen. So let that set the scene for you where we're at Compton's. So Jean Compton's was an all-night local chain restaurant. Again, it's like hanging out at Denny's and stuff. Just the things are hitting the fan. It was a trans hangout. There were sex workers that also hung out. Homeless kids. We see a recurring theme in LGBTQ history includes LGBT youth. That's why it's very important we always support our youth. And it was actually picketed a month prior to the riot that occurred because of discrimination. They were not letting people in, they were kicking trans people out just straight up. And this moment in history was almost completely lost to history. If it was not for Dr. Susan Stryker, she's a trans historian, a researcher, and a documentarian, she followed the rabbit trail for years, hunting down trans women in the community and getting their oral stories and using that to weave a story together about what happened at Compton's. And you can actually watch Screaming Queens. It is required viewing class. It's free on YouTube.
Okay.
So this riot was a response to police discrimination. The police at that time were allowing prostitution. They were allowing drug dealing and gambling for payoffs. You can do your business, but we are going to do business together, they said. There were raids were very, very common back then. Harassing people, again, very, very common. IDing people, all of that good stuff. Arrests were being made, often for obstructing the sidewalk. So just being a trans girl on the street, they'd arrest you. They would arrest you for female impersonation, things like that. At the jail, again, back in those days, it was not a good time to get arrested. They would cut trans women's hair, and the girls that refused to have their hair shorn were put in the hole. That is what they called it, the hole. And you could be taken to jail for it at any second, is what one of the interviewed ladies said in the documentary. So this was a time when trans people are experiencing both great empowerment and great harassment. And when those things come together, a riot will ensue. So in this case, this is another moment in history when we've got trans women, particularly trans women of color, are really leading the charge in these efforts. And these are some of the women that would have been hanging out at Compton's. Felicia Elzanato and Tamara Ching, they are interviewed in Screaming Queens. They have wonderful things to say. Please, please go watch it. And yes, my sources are all in the slideshow, so you can go do all your own research. So what happened at Compton's? The story goes that We've got a room full of transgender people. The staff is called the police. The police show up and they start doing what?
Checking ID.
Checking IDs. If you are tallying up, we are like a lot on checking IDs. It's very important for your safety to update your IDs. So a trans woman, they start trying to arrest her. She refuses and again starts throwing coffee. Y'all, it was not paper Starbucks mugs, it was ceramic coffee mugs. They start throwing coffee cups. They start throwing sugar shakers. Windows get broken. They chase the police outside. They start damaging police cars, and then they burn down a newspaper stand. Police held their ground. And they started loading trans women into the paddy wagons. And back in those days, sometimes they would just drive you around for hours with your handcuffs on, uncomfortable in the back of a paddy wagon for hours just to punish you further, only to take you back to the jail and harass you some more. It was not a good time. The next day, protesters went back. And somehow, overnight, they had already replaced all the windows. They were refused entry, and so what did the protesters do? They smashed the windows. So what happened after that? So we had this big explosion, and then the community starts talking to each other. They start getting organized. The Vanguard street actions start going on. Vanguard was another homophile organization. And these folks decided, you are acting like we are trash to be swept away, so let's get out in the streets, let's show ourselves, and let's clean up our neighborhood, let's clean up the streets. And I love that. That is so delightfully green and nerdy. There were efforts being made within the community to address the issues instead of sweep them under the rug. So they started opening up transgender clinics, giving people HRT and surgery. There was a peer-led counseling system that was available so that trans ladies, trans men could find each other and talk and share notes about access to care. In 1995, San Francisco finally passed a non-discrimination ordinance specifically about trans people. The 40th anniversary, we got the Jean Compton's riot historical marker. In 2016, on the 50th anniversary of that celebration, a new street sign was unveiled, Jean Compton's Way. And then the community starts organizing and organizing and organizing, and they got 2017 Compton's Transgender Cultural District. We have our own space in San Francisco. And those ladies, led primarily by women of color, worked together to campaign against gentrification in that area, to start buying up properties in that area. And then they lobbied and lobbied and lobbied, and they got it renamed in 2020, so it is now centering the trans community. It is the Transgender Cultural District. And ever since then, in San Francisco, in that neighborhood, trans women have been gathering together, trans people have been doing activism, working together. There is a trans pride march. You should go, it's a good time. And again, historical markers, these are fairly new. This one's very early, from 2006. That's probably the earliest recognized historical marker for LGBTQ people. And the street signs are fabulous. Pride flags everywhere, y'all. Okay, the Black Cat protest. This is the first organized LGBT protest in LA. Some history will call it the Black Cat Riot. That is not what had happened. It was a planned protest. So picture it. Silver Lake, Los Angeles, 1967. What was Silver Lake? Gayborhood. Are we noticing a pattern? It's almost like whenever we have places that are our own, they have to be invaded and we have to be harassed. The Black Cat Tavern was a gay bar. 1967 is worth noting because that is the year that Ronald Reagan was elected governor. Ronald Reagan, as governor, was a law and order governor, which meant we're going to uphold the law and order, which means police officers and police unions, they wanted to impress that new governor, so they amped up their efforts to really, really harass us. It was a good time. So this event is in response to police harassment. We do have evidence that this exists. What happened? New Year's Eve. Good times. New Year's Eve, hanging out at the queer bar with your friends. And plainclothes, about a dozen plainclothes police officers come inside and start milling around us. And they wait, and they wait, and they wait. In those days, we could gather, but we couldn't act gay. So at the stroke of midnight, what happens on New Year's Eve at midnight?
Kisses.
We kiss. And if you're gay, you kiss someone who's gay with you.
And you both get arrested.
And in that moment, strike of midnight occurs, and all hell breaks loose. No one really knows exactly what started everything, what set it off. But as soon as the stroke of midnight, couples were kissing, and bam! Police jumped on our community. 2 bartenders were beaten unconscious. A manager named Lee Roy. The history says that they mistook her for a man in a dress. So what I hear is someone who's fairly masculine, wearing ladies' clothes, and cisgender was beat to it. I will donate to Alphabet Army for that. Sorry about that. She was beaten severely. She was left bleeding on the sidewalk while they waited to arrest her. Even if it was mistaken identity, that's how they treat our trans girls. That's not cool. And that's one instance in history when cis people were treated just like transgender people. And we see this now with the way that the bathroom bills are passed. So 14 people were arrested, 6 were charged with lewd conduct for kissing. They were convicted, and 2 of the ones that were convicted had to register as sex offenders. What they did was they appealed that case because the sex offender registry for a kiss, are you kidding me? And they lost that case. The conviction was upheld. Community-driven fundraising efforts, and this is something to really make note of, reached as far as New York. Our community has always had a history of networking and mutual aid. Remember that. So that is the inciting incident. So what happened was queers came together, they printed off flyers. We love a good flyer. We love to disperse information. They planned a protest. And they said, okay, we are going to follow every law. We're not going to give them any reason to harass us. We're not going to invite anything further than we are able to. And they were met with squadrons of like a phalanx of police officers ready to do work, and not one arrest was made because we minded our P's and Q's, and about 200 people were there. Some reports say 500, we don't know. And that is the protest. So again, our coloring sheets are inspired by today's presentation. So that inspired the publication of The Advocate, which is our oldest gay publication. It is the only pre-Stonewall queer publication still in existence today. It is a wonderful resource for queer news and media. Also, the Black Cat had a cultural monument in 2007. In 2014, Alma Lopez with her students painted a mural, and you can go see that. There was a reenactment. Okay, queers, we cannot make fun of the history nerds anymore for their little reenactments, because we had our own to celebrate. Good times. In 2021, a coalition marched from the original site of Black Cat. So a little callback to history about police brutality, racism, homophobia, anti-trans violence, and for gay rights. And in 2022, California, the state, designated the first and only California queer historical marker. And in 2023, there was a plaque installed. So yay for us! We're just getting all this recognition. And that's Alma Lopez and her students' mural right there. The Patch Bar. Oh, I like this one. I like this one a lot. It's not against the law to be a homosexual, and it's not a crime to be in a gay bar. We're Americans too. Thank you, Lee Glaze. Picture it, Wilmington, California, August 17th, maybe, 1968. At the Patch Bar. The Patch Bar was owned and operated by Lee Glaze. He was referred to as the blonde darling, and he was sassy and a queen, and I stand, honestly. He allowed everybody, all of us under the umbrella, into his space. And in fact, he had been, because again, what? Bar raids were regular. He had been threatened to be closed down entirely. They said, if you do not quit having drag queens, if you do not stop same-sex dancing, and I swear to God, if you let more than one person in the bathroom at a time, we will shut you down. Some bartenders, some owners back in the day, what they did was they complied. So again, that's why we see that trans people were often pushed out of queer spaces, and that's why we took over coffee shops. But he tried it for a little bit, but you know what? When you try to make your sacred space less sacred, it really hurts business, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So he said, okay, never mind, scratch that. New plan. And when I give the signal, I will keep a watch over all of you while you hang out. When I give the signal, when I see a police officer, you drop everything gay that you are doing, play along, play along, and when they leave, I'll give the all clear. And that song that he played on the jukebox was God Save the Queen. Cheeky, right? In fact, God Save the Queen has a large history in our gay bars. It was used a lot because why gay people, we talk, it's a small community. And we know about this event because of eyewitness accounts and an amazing archive of photos that exist online. And again, my sources are at the very back. So what happened, the accounts kind of vary. But we have a swinging hot night happening at the gay bar, and undercover police officers get inside. Somehow Lee does not recognize, and if anybody's on TikTok, you're seeing those TikTok videos of how to like recognize an undercover police officer. Lee Glaze was doing that for us. But somehow this night, he did not notice, so God Save the Queen did not get played. The police say that one man had grabbed another man's butt flirtatiously. That's a very sweet way to put it. But Lee Glaze said, that did not happen because those boys did not like each other like that. There is no way in hell that happened. They did not like each other like that because they were fighting over another man. And I believe Lee's version of events actually better because I know gay people, and that's how we are. So another version of events is that Lee said, Lee was on stage, sees undercover Popo in the audience, and goes, well, looky here, if it isn't our friends at the police department, and how dare y'all send such homely looking individuals into my space. I believe that version of events. So they leave, they say, okay, we'll be back. And they show back up a little bit later with uniformed officers who immediately enter the bar and do what? Start checking IDs. Jeez. And they started making arrests. While this is going on, Lee is getting more and more angry. He jumps up on stage and he addresses the queer community and he says it's not against the law to be a homosexual and it is not a crime to be in a gay bar. We're Americans too. And then the other gay people and the trans people and the drag queens, they all started chanting, we're Americans too! We're Americans too! And I'm sure the police were like, the hell? the homosexuals, they're chanting, chief. So Lee announces, don't you worry, I will pay your bail. I will pay the bail, y'all. We'll see you downtown at the police department. And Lee announces out to the crowd, who amongst us has a flower shop? I know, it's kind of funny. How many of you gay men in this room own a flower shop? And one gay man was like, oh, I do. And he said, okay, I want to buy out every single one of your flowers. So they went from the bar, they were trudging on down over to the flower shop, got every single flower that they could grab except for the pansies. So the story goes. And then they marched on down to the police station. At the police station, Lee shows up. And the story from his friend, Troy Perry, is that Lee is there with flowers in hand. And he gets up to the front desk and they're like, how can I help you? And he goes, we're here to bail out our sisters. Cheeky. And the police officers are like, okay, what are their names? Tony Valdez and Bill Hastings. And the officer was like, what? And was so bewildered that they called back up, like, can you please come up to the front desk? There are homosexuals threatening us with flowers. In fact, it's said that one officer said, if one flower so much as touches me, I swear to God, I'm going to arrest you for harassment and violence. They did not know what to do. It was the whole bar full of people, right? But now they were inside the lobby of the police department, hanging out, taking pictures, posing together with their flowers, just having a good old time. And they finally were able to bail out the boys. It took about 2 to 6 hours. The length of time that they were there varies because, again, you've got neurodivergent people hanging out and they're all time blind. Plus gay people time, we don't know. 2 to 6 hours. They were there. It felt like forever. And this is a little bit of that night. You can see. So this is one of the most well documented, well photographed events because some nerd had their camera with them that day. You see them with their little signs. They're holding the sign for the Los Angeles Police Department. It's cute. This is Lee right here. Gorgeous and blonde and beautiful, cis gay man. And then they were like, all right, well, we got the boys out, babes. We need a group picture. I just want to know, did they have an officer take the photo? Like, sir, can you? Just real quick. So that night, they get their friends out. Tony Valdez looks at Troy Perry. He goes, God doesn't care about us. And for people who are believers, people that is a very important part of their life, to feel that way is really awful. To think that God doesn't love you. And Troy Perry heard that. He was already a priest. He heard that. And he started the Metropolitan Community Church as a gay-affirming church. So you see right here, we've got, he died to take away your sins, not your sexuality.
Amen.
Troy Perry. We have a history of gay-affirming spaces, including our bars and our churches working together, because those are the only places we could really congregate. So, very important part of our history right there, and understanding that when we alienate our believing family, they get alienated twice over out of religious spaces and queer spaces. But they have always been a part of our history. All right, y'all.
Here we go.
The big one. The big one. And I'm actually not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. Well, I might. We'll see. This is the birth of the gay rights movement in America. Sylvia Rivera said, "I remember when someone threw a Molotov cocktail, I thought, my God, the revolution is here. The revolution is finally here." Stonewall. Picture it. The ugliest, sleaziest, nastiest little bar you ever heard of. Mafia owned. That's right. Mafia owned and operated. Actually, a lot of gay bars back in the day were mafia owned and operated, which was kind of cool, kind of not cool, which meant it was kind of cool because that meant that they could harass the police back on our behalf and create a safe space for us. But that meant they also were serving us watered down drinks. It wasn't a cute bar. When we talk about Stonewall, I really need you to understand, this is not a fantastic, fabulous place. This is the dirtiest, dingiest, rattiest, gremlinest place. Serving watered down drinks without a liquor license, so you had to, usually you would bring your own stuff and just leave it with the bartender, they'll do it for you. This was in response to police harassment. Stonewall has been, had already been raided before. And this event, we know this event happened because we have eyewitness accounts. But what happens when you have a lot of people at the same place at the same time? Eyewitness accounts do vary. So we are going to talk about what we know happened. So the basics. Stonewall was raided by the police in June. This is why we celebrate Pride in the hottest parts of the year. So the police show up at the bar. Inside the bar, we've got all kinds of folks, but it is worth noting that back in the day, when we think about Stonewall, because of the myth around Stonewall, we think that Stonewall was always happening in place full of trans and queer people. The trans element did not show up at Stonewall until kind of later in Stonewall's game, and they were fairly new to being in that space by the time around the riot had actually happened. So the riots, police are starting to beat people. Back in those days, they would line you up. A lot of Stonewall veterans will tell you about this. They would line you up and have female officers go and check people for their gender. Check you.
Oh, wow.
Not your IDs, babies. Check you. To make sure that you were in compliance. And I really want to paint that picture, make sure you understand that, because some of the laws that are being debated today are talking about that. It's very important that we maintain our integrity and our dignity through registering to vote if you can, and if you cannot for whatever reason, then you just talk about these issues to everybody who will listen, because that's what they would do. And some of those instances did lead to sexual assault. It was a bad time. It was, again, our elder gays are traumatized, y'all. So they are doing the usual. They are picking on us. They are rounding people up. They are beating people. People are resisting. All hell breaks loose. No one really knows exactly what happened. No one knows exactly how it all started. But what did we start doing? We started throwing pennies. You ever been hit by a penny? Yeah, it really hurts. So the riot ensues. We are throwing pennies. We are throwing bar stools. We are throwing fists. We are throwing everything. And getting arrested, getting taken downtown. And then we showed up for 2, 3, 4 days. Reports vary. And essentially, everybody was involved in Stonewall. There was not one central figure, it was all of us. That would be like if someone just came in here and we all were like, bet, let's go. And we all started throwing it. So if I'm looking at Eric when all hell breaks loose, I might think Eric is the reason why it all started. And if Lexi is looking across that river, Lexi might think River started it. So we don't really know what happened. We just have a whole lot of stories. But a riot ensued because of the raid. People were arrested, and we, the queer community, continued to show up for days on end. One version of events that I love, Stormy DeLarvery. She was a butch lesbian and proud of it. She would patrol the streets to make sure her babies, the gays and hot little lesbians, and the trans girls, she'd make sure everybody was all right. Being, sometimes you just need a really strong butch lesbian in your life. And the story goes, we have multiple accounts of this event. This is why we do accept that this particular event did happen, because a lot of people said that outside of the bar, a butch lesbian was being beaten by police. Again, it doesn't matter if we're girls. It matters that you're gay or a faggot or a dyke. And that was all they needed. So yes, women were getting the shit knocked out of them. Again, I'm sorry, I'm like up to $10 in the swear jar. So Stormy DeLarvery, a butch lesbian, was having all hell knocked out of her outside, and she addresses the crowd, "What are you doing? Why don't you do something?" And we did. We threw down. Some stories identify Stormy as the person who did that. Sometimes Stormy even said that she did that. And other times Stormy was like, "That wasn't me." So we don't really know. But we do know that some butch lesbian called out, and we all responded in kind, like, okay, well, I guess it's on. There are many versions of events for this story, so there's a lot of mythology. And so today, when we leave this room today, we're going to have an accurate portrayal of our history, because accurate portrayals of history mean that we appreciate the actors of history the way they should be. One myth is that it was caused by the collective grief we had at the death of Our Lady Judy Garland.
Oh.
Listen, it is upsetting. She was a gem, but I don't think the loss of Our Lady Judy Garland, I don't think that was quite enough to get us to throw down with the police. But that day, I think it was like her funeral was that day, and so the newspaper headlines would say that, "Oh my God, the collective grief of all these queers, because Judy Garland over the rainbow, on the Rainbow Bridge." Some versions of the story say that the riot started when someone said, "Oh, hell no," and threw a shot glass against a mirror. Other versions say that someone threw a brick. Stonewall veterans that were interviewed said, "Where did these bricks come from? None of us remember bricks being part of that equation. I'm sure some stones were thrown, pebbles, rocks, whatever you could find, but bricks, maybe not." Marsha P. Johnson is the biggest myth of Stonewall. A lot of people say that Marsha threw the first brick at Stonewall. If you just follow this little link right here, you will go to an interview that she gave Randy Wicker, where she says, "I showed up about after 2 a.m. Everything was already going down." So Marsha did not throw the first brick. She probably threw the 15th brick, if the bricks were even there. Sylvia Rivera might have thrown the first Molotov, but if you follow this link right here, you will have her own oral history where she says that she might have thrown the second one. So we know that this exists because we've got a paper trail. We have history that says this exists. We've got the newspapers, we've got photos of the damage from the bar, we've got this lovely little message from the Mattachine Society. "We homosexuals plead with our people to please help maintain peaceful and quiet conduct on the streets of the village." Do you think that was well received?
No.
Girl, no. Mattachine, y'all sit down. It's time for rage. We got gays hit cops. Homo-ness raided, queen bees stinging mad. So after Stonewall, we all got along. We were one big happy family. We got all of our rights. Okay, that didn't happen. There was community division. I showed you that little message from the Mattachine Society. The Mattachine Society, it is worth noting, was a primarily white people organization for white gay men. A lot of the people that were being traumatized and targeted by police tended to be trans women, white ones, brown ones, tended to be youth. There have been, since that time, there were several people that were part of that organization who said, "Hey, y'all, shame on you," that have since said, "I feel so bad that I did that. We have all these rights. I am so sorry we did that." As they should be. That also led to the very first Gay organizations. We are officially stepping away from homophile into gay. We've got the Gay Liberation Front. It lasted 4 months. That led to the Gay Activist Alliance. Booyah! The first gay organizations. That also led to STARS, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. That is the work of Sylvia Rivera. That is the work of Marsha P. Johnson. They were house mothers. Did anybody watch Pose? Okay, Pose is required reading and viewing. House mothers. You've got queer people. We do chosen family. The matriarchs were our mothers. That's exactly what Sylvia and Marsha did. They would help the homeless youth and other trans people within their community. Sometimes what they would do, and they were street hustlers, by the way, they were sex workers. Our movement is built on the back by some work that they had to do that was not the best jobs to have. Sometimes they would get their money together, and they would say, all right, Sylvia, take this money, go get a hotel room. I'll go tell the other 30 girls to slowly walk in one by one in intervals that we won't get caught. And then we have a hotel room for all of us, because most of us are homeless, to hang out for a couple of nights. And they did just that. Community mutual aid and community-led efforts like this have always been a part of our history. And that is what I want you to leave today, talking about Sylvia and Marsha, because that has led to an entire generation of people who survived to become elders in our community. Not throwing bricks, not throwing shot glasses, not throwing Molotov cocktails, by listening to the needs of their community and meeting those needs. And today, when we do this as LGBTQ people, we honor that by supporting each other. Our community support is so vital, otherwise we do disappear, we do die, we do get arrested. So that's what I want you to remember about them. It also led to the Christopher Street Liberation Day. That was our first gay pride parade. Yes! Other pride marches occurred in other towns because, again, why? Gay people are on that phone. Like, girl, did you hear what happened at Stonewall? Yes. A brick, I don't know. And a shift in our subculture. So we went from homophiles, quiet, meeting in secret, to out loud, proud, gay, on the streets, identifying ourselves people. So out of the closets into the streets. Beautiful. They made that banner. They only lasted 4 months. Bless our hearts. It's a time-long tradition, y'all. This is Sylvia and Marsha. Power to the people. Gay Liberation Day, 1970. Yes. Gay people. Loud gay people, lesbians. So in 2016, not too long ago, Stonewall was officially recognized as a New York State historical site. And President Obama called it a national monument. In 2017, our pride flag became the very first federally maintained pride flag flying over Stonewall. In 2019, for our 50th, the police apologized. The NYPD said the actions taken by the NYPD were wrong, plain and simple. The actions and the laws were discriminatory and oppressive, and for that, I apologize. And we've had peace in the land ever since. So we are officially we have officially started, we've left the homophile movement, and we have officially begun the gay liberation movement. And the fight is not over, because at this time, we still couldn't get married. We still had job discrimination. Imagine being a lesbian back in these days, trying to get financially secure. Like, we had a lot of issues, so a lot of our histories intersect and commingle. There was a long fight ahead of us, but it was all because we got pissed off and wouldn't take it any longer. So if you leave here today with nothing else, leave here inspired that you mattered because they thought you mattered enough to make a big deal out of it. You matter. I'm glad you're here. Our young people really, really are the future. And it's thanks to the elder queer community that paved the way so that they could rise up. And now I am going to tell you, I'm very tired. I do not want to do this anymore. So we're going to talk. I'm going to teach you some things so that I can retire because Jay wants to retire. We're tired people. But that's it. That is a brief glimpse of our history. I hope you will come back in future for other classes because I would actually like to go more in depth with Wolfie's class for Stonewall because that one is much more researched than mine. So keep an eye out. If you are looking to connect with LGBTQ people, we've got Alphabet Army, Tyler Area Gays, PFLAG. If you are a believer, we have Just As I Am Tyler. If you need news, if you need to be able to see this information, I am a loudmouth on the internet with East Texas Rainbow Network, so find me on Facebook and Instagram. We have a brand new trans-centric LGBTQ safe space that celebrates, advocates, supports, and educates us and the cis allies who love us. And representatives of Piney Woods Queers are here today. If you want the Discord server, let us know. We have a Facebook, we have an Instagram, and y'all, we did that in 20 hours. Do y'all have any questions, concerns, or comments today?
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Erin. Thank you.
All right.
Oh, we're gonna have chips and queso. Chips and queso, you guys. We're gonna wind down here and then meet at Don Juan's for chips and queso.